Well, apparently I am on just a roll with recording videos. It is a Sunday morning. I'm sitting here in my sweatpants, my Captain America t shirt, my Ryan Reynolds coffee mug gifted to me by my daughter for my 53rd birthday, which is pretty cool. Um, and I wanted to talk about something that came up recently, and I thought, that could be something really fun to talk about. So let's talk about therapy. Going to therapy, picking a therapist, finding a therapist, and everything else that might be related to therapy. Because I've been to therapy. I went to therapy for a couple of years. Let's see, 2 3 years from the time I found out my ex-wife was having an affair. um by the way, Black Rifle Coffee, if you're if you're looking for folks to sponsor, to send free coffee to, feel free. I completely love your products, love your company. Anyway, but I went to therapy, for a couple of years on a at least weekly basis. My ex wife and I tried doing couples therapy together in the midst of the infidelity and everything. That didn't work because she wasn't into it. But I have great fond feelings for the therapist that we worked with at the time because she didn't, she called us on our bullshit. Anyway, I've been to therapy for several years. It was like 2 3 years after the divorce, through the separation, through the divorce, all that stuff. And one of the best, excuse me. So, I went through a process. Let me talk about that first. I went through a process of trying to find a good therapist. I remember when I found out my wife was having an affair and that I really wanted to try to work on our marriage. I remember struggling to find a therapist who had any availability. Apparently, if you want a good job security, become a therapist. But I remember feeling like that it was almost like a 911 situation. Like I wanted to dial 911 and be like, "Quick, send a therapist. Our marriage needs help." That's not quite the way it works, at least not around here in Central Oregon where we live. The therapists are all booked, and it was weeks, if not months, to get in with anyone. Um, so that was a just gut wrenching process because it felt like an emergency. It felt like a massive crisis that needed to be dealt with immediately. And it's like being told that the ambulance will get here in 3 months. But we struggled to find a therapist, but we did find one. Went through that process for a while. Didn't do a whole lot. Didn't do any good for our marriage. um, really kind of only works if both of you want to save the marriage. And that was not the case for my wife. But then I went to therapy for, like I said, a couple of years after that. And I found it incredibly helpful. It took me a while to find the right person. I tried out 2 or 3 different therapists, and 2 of them were kind of working out pretty well, but one was a younger guy. I think he was married, but I don't think maybe he had one kid. But younger guy, earlier in life, and basically I kind of felt like he didn't have the life experience to help me through this process. Like he could sort of guide me on decision making or whatever. But when it came to actually offering me, I guess guidance isn't the right word, because that's not really what therapists do. They don't guide you, they help you find your way. But I just didn't feel like he could offer me the perspective of an older person who could help guide me in that way. So, super nice guy, doing a competent professional job, but just wasn't the right fit, which is part of it. That is part of the process. You have to find the person with whom you resonate, and who gives you a feeling that they can help guide you in this process, and then really connect with them. It really is that. I did end up with an amazing therapist, female therapist, which maybe is relevant for some of you. I didn't really care whether I had a male therapist or a female therapist. For me, it was more about who can kind of give me the guidance, or the guide me in the process of figuring my stuff out. And she kind of fit that bill. And it was interesting. It was not the same person that my ex-wife and I saw as a couples therapist, but it was in the same practice. So the couples therapist recommended the therapist I ended up seeing, and that helped. That always helps when you're like, okay, I trust the one. I trusted the first therapist's opinion, so that made it easier to kind of open the door to the second therapist. So I go through all of that. Basically, it's a way to say to you, is therapy right for you? Is it right for you? What made me come to this topic for this video was I was speaking with a friend of mine who is struggling in his marriage, a long-term marriage, multiple decades, and they're really struggling to figure out how to move forward together, and if they're going to move forward together, and what that means, and the effect it's having on his life and his wife's life and his children's lives. And he said that I asked, like, have you gone to therapy? Do you have a therapist? And he said that they tried couples counseling, but for him, it felt like just condemnation or judgment. It felt like a negative experience to him at a time when he was struggling as it was to cope with, the struggles in his marriage. And I that was an interesting perspective for me to hear. I always had kind of the opposite experience with therapy, that the process of therapy was actually lightening the load. It wasn't adding more. Like, he felt very judged. He felt like it was more about his shortcomings and his inadequacies and his blind spots. And that was just one more piling on of negativity. I'm reading into his short comment a little bit, but it was more just like piling negative on top of negative in his mind. For me, it was a very different experience. It was an unburdening. It was a lightening of the load. It was a process of actually understanding better and better why I am the way I am, and why I was the way I was, and my role in the dissipation of our relationship. So for me, it was a very different experience. And I remember early on in the process, like at one point, I have this mental picture in my head of metaphorically looking over my shoulder and seeing this giant stack of 100-foot tall just pile of luggage. And I was like, ah, crap, that's all my baggage, isn't it? Like, I have to unpack all of that? Ah, crap. Okay. But the thing is, what I found, my experience, everyone's experience, I'm sure, is very different, or is at least unique. But my experience was that unpacking that, once you start unpacking that stuff, it just drops away. Once you unpack it and you process it and you understand it, it just ceases to be a burden that you have to carry. And it's just becomes a thing that you now understand about yourself. It's not a thing you have to carry. It's just a data point. So I found therapy very helpful, and I've been back a few times, just kind of little check-in sessions with my therapist, more just to keep her up to date what's going on in my life. She was so helpful to me in building a new foundation for myself, coming to understand my values, my basis, my, what it is, who it is I want to become, who it is I choose to be, what my values are, that kind of stuff. And letting go, Jesus Christ, letting go of the sorrow and the anger and the pain and the fury and the confusion over what had happened to my marriage. This thing that was supposed to be my anchor, my rock, that now has been cut loose, destabilized who I was, who I saw myself as, my identity, my life, my all that stuff. It helped me move past all that stuff so that I could be and become the man who was then able to be ready when I met the woman who has become my wife. So it built that foundation. It helped me unburden myself with the old stuff and reconfigure who I am so that I was ready and prepared to handle the challenges and the joys and all that of meeting someone new and finding someone new who I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And do that with, not unburdened by any leftover residue from my divorce and my previous marriage, but to be able to say, I know where this bit of drama is coming from. I know where this anger is coming from. I know where this overreaction is coming from. It's coming from the details of my previous marriage and the aspects of my divorce and betrayal and all that stuff that happened to me. It just let me look at those things with a little bit of detachment and see them just as factors, and not as aspects of who I am. So I found it very helpful, and I was surprised when my friend said that to him it was just another negative experience. And maybe it's just a timing thing. Maybe for you, wherever you are in your struggle in your marriage, in your separation, in your divorce, or as you fight to save your marriage, maybe it's not the right time. Maybe it's not the right time. It's not the right person. It's not just right for you right now. Will I stand by my belief that therapy can be an incredibly beneficial experience? Yeah, I definitely will. I think of my friend right now who's struggling in his marriage, and they have past trauma, past things that they work through or haven't worked through properly, or at some point I will I still maintain, even for him, that that is going to be a beneficial experience. Unpacking your baggage is the only way forward. I feel like. I feel like confronting that dragon, if you will, um, is the only way to get to the where you want to be, which is one of the big commitments I made to myself. Is I was like, I am never going to be one of those guys who years later is still bitter and angry and hates women and thinks marriage is a travesty. I never want to be that guy. I've been a romantic my whole life, and I wanted to maintain that sort of perhaps naive, but that romantic vision of things, of like finding the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. So what's interesting though, my wife and I, my current wife and I, haven't been to therapy. We are very good at recognizing when each other is being triggered by something, recognizing and offering grace when that leads to an overreaction to something that happens between us. We're really good, each of us, at recognizing where that comes from and offering love and offering grace in place of anger and judgment. Could we benefit from couples therapy? I'm sure we could. Are we able to work our way through those things on our own? For the most part, yeah. But all of that being said, if wherever you are, if you're struggling, I'm trying to think, if you're like my friend who just feels like therapy was too judgmental, too just more negativity on top of what he's already going through, maybe it's not the right time, maybe it's not the right therapist. But I really think therapy can help you understand yourself and unpack your stuff. And all of that sounds maybe touchy-feely or kind of woo to some people, but dear God, it feels good when you don't have to carry that crap anymore. When you can actually just understand why those things had an effect on you, and how it had an effect on your marriage, or how it's affecting your relationship with your kids, whatever. If you can really understand that and go, oh, okay, I see that now, it ceases to have an emotional drag on you. So I think it's worth it. I'd like to hear from other folks what their experience has been. I know I won't speak in specifics, but I know someone who is older than I am who is going through therapy with his then wife, and it was a scam. It was a self-proclaimed therapist who had self-published a book and who had no qualifications, no actual training, no actual certifications, and was just a scam artist. So it as with most things, there are good people and there are bad people in that area. Be smart. Don't. I mean, it was just painful to watch him buy into this charlatan's scam and defend her as a therapist. And we looked at her website and at her her book. I'm putting air quotes around all of these things because she was no therapist, and her book was a thing that self-published. She paid to have it printed. It didn't have any. It wasn't a professional work. And yet he was like, "Oh no, she's a published author and she's a therapist." And we're like, "Well, she's not licensed by anybody." and the book is nonsense. And just to watch this therapist, this scam artist, under the guise of some sort of sense of authority, mess with his life the way she was really undermining his sense of self and his sense of worth and his sense of his own ability to judge. And my wife and I strongly urged this other person to get away from them because it was a scam. So it is like most things, you need to exercise some judgment, exercise some discernment. Find the right person who is in some way licensed, some way qualified to do this work. And when you find the right person, it truly can be helpful. It can really help you find your way. And there were still, I mean, it's been a couple of years since I've been there. Still principles, still questions that she would ask me that I think, that pop into my head when I'm struggling with something. So it's I think a positive experience if you get the right person. So let me know if you have any thoughts on that. I think there are people out there with lots of strong feelings, either for or against therapy of any kind. So let me know what you think. In the meantime, I'll keep thinking about what to talk about next, and there's more to come. All right, talk soon.